was 21 when I began working at a funeral home in Idaho. While it wasn't my ideal job, the pay was substantially better than what other places were offering at that time, and I really needed the money. Very few people were willing to confront death on a daily basis, but I like to think of the body as merely a temporary vessel for the soul. With a bit of courage and a healthy dose of curiosity, I started my new life working the night shift. Initially, nothing could prepare me for the experiences I would have. Working there involved overseeing overnight shifts, silent wakes, and that unsettling chill I felt every time I had to touch a corpse. Still, the first few weeks went smoothly. Most people seemed relieved when I arrived in the hearse, as it meant they could avoid the burden of hospital paperwork and the anxiety of making funeral arrangements. I like to think I brought a small measure of comfort amid their sorrow. However, as my first overnight transport assignments drew closer, I began to feel that tightness in my chest that signals an impending issue, even if I wasn't sure what it could be. I vividly recall one night that transformed my life forever. It was my first solo middle-of-the-night transport without a senior worker to guide me. My more experienced colleague, Ben, had fallen ill abruptly, and another co-worker, Stephen, begrudgingly agreed to accompany me since he didn't particularly enjoy driving at such late hours. The hospital called for a pickup of a body that needed to be at the funeral home before dawn for the wake preparations, and the family was anxiously waiting for the transport. After receiving the keys to the hearse, we set off under the moonlight. The hearse was a long, somber vehicle with an engine that usually ran well. I had checked it before we left and was confident everything was in order. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my stomach as I drove. Trying to calm myself, I took a deep breath and tried to push aside the mix of anxiety, curiosity, and a hint of dread swirling in my head. Upon arriving at the hospital, the staff barely acknowledged us. It was evident they had been overwhelmed all night with emergencies and paperwork. They directed us to the room where the deceased was located. He was a man in his 40s who, according to his medical records, had suffered a massive heart attack. Without any formalities, we signed the death certificates. As we prepared to move the body on a gurney into the hearse, the weight of reality truly settled in. It was a strange feeling, carrying someone who had been alive just hours before. No more breathing, no heartbeat, no consciousness. I tried to look at it practically, but an unsettling tingling made me glance around, as if I expected the corpse to suddenly move. We carefully closed the back doors and began our drive back to the funeral home. It was around 3 a.m., the darkest and quietest part of the night, with barely any cars on the road and only the distant hum of a truck fading away. My co-worker Stephen remained silent in the passenger seat, anxiously fiddling with a small flashlight he repeatedly pulled in and out of his shirt pocket. I focused on the road, trying not to dwell on anything too much. Although the trip was supposed to be relatively short, that night felt infinite. The streetlights were dim, and sometimes one would flicker, plunging us into stretches of darkness. It felt like we were trapped in a disturbing dream from which we couldn't awaken. Then something happened that I will never forget. The hearse suddenly shut off without warning, the engine simply dying and the dashboard lights going dark. I braked carefully to avoid crashing. Stephen asked in a quiet voice what had happened. I checked the dashboard, attempting to restart the engine, but nothing happened. I turned the key off and tried again. Still nothing. Stephen quickly got out to pop the hood, thinking it might have overheated, but everything looked fine. There were no loose hoses, no broken wires, nothing to explain why the hearse had detached from reality. As we stood there on that deserted road, chilled by the cold night air, I felt as though something was watching us from the shadows. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a figure in the back seat, a shadow sitting there. Though the rear area was supposed to be just for the casket and transport equipment. I tried to convince myself it was merely my imagination, as shadows can play tricks when you're on edge. I couldn't dwell on it for long though, because a sharp thud echoed from the back of the vehicle. A clear, firm knock, as if someone inside was pounding on the door. I froze. There was no way that supposedly dead man could be moving, yet the knock had been unmistakably real. Stephen and I exchanged wide-eyed looks, standing in silence and disbelief. Without a word, we circled around the vehicle, shining the flashlight to ensure nothing had come loose and that the casket was still securely fastened. The body remained motionless inside. How could we explain that sound? I swept the flashlight across every corner, seeing nothing unusual except for the fear mirrored in our eyes. We returned to the front seats, breathing heavily. I made another attempt to start the hearse, and to our surprise, the engine roared to life. The dashboard lights illuminated again, as if the system had merely paused before deciding to work with no logical reason. I switched on the headlights and cautiously pressed the accelerator, hoping we wouldn't find ourselves stranded once more. Stephen, trembling, held the flashlight in his hand, occasionally directing its beam toward the back to ensure nothing was moving. We proceeded down the desolate avenue, my heart pounding so loudly that I thought I could hear it in the night stillness. I tried to concentrate on reaching the funeral home, delivering the body, and putting this frightening experience behind us. However, an unsettling dread grew within me as we neared our destination. Then I began to notice an odd smell, reminiscent of wilted flowers within the hearse, a blend of formaldehyde and rotting petals that turned my stomach. I glanced at the clock. It read 3:22 a.m., the infamous hour that many urban legends mark as particularly ominous. I swallowed hard and kept driving. Suddenly, something shifted in the back, and I felt it through the steering wheel, like the rear axle trembling. Looking in the rearview mirror, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a shape rising slightly, just for a moment, but enough to chill my blood. Stephen turned his head at the same moment I did and, without a word, lowered the flashlight. We didn't want to confirm what we might have seen, didn't want to confront the possibility of movement in the casket. Nonetheless, that brief silhouette lingered in my mind. We drove in silence, and the journey to the funeral home seemed to stretch endlessly, as if we were stuck in a nightmarish loop with the same streets repeating and traffic lights flickering amber. Yet no other vehicles in sight. It felt like the city was enveloped in a strange stillness. We passed a dark park, deserted at that hour, where a few swings swayed gently in the chill breeze, an image that sent shivers down my spine. The atmosphere felt thick and oppressive, weighing on my senses. Suddenly, I sensed the hearse lurch slightly to the right, as if something heavy had shifted in the back. Instinctively, I slammed on the brakes to avoid losing control, the screech of the tires echoing in the empty street. This can't be happening, I thought, terror coursing from my neck to my feet, my pulse racing. I pulled over to the curb to check. When we got to the back, we noticed that the casket lid had slid open a few inches. It was barely noticeable, but undeniably ajar, one of the small metal latches having come loose, and I felt my hands trembling. We adjusted the lid, making sure the body remained in the same position. It was lifeless and rigid from the onset of rigor mortis. Yet in the dim glow of the flashlight, I could have sworn the expression on its face had shifted. It felt as though its eyes were half open, or perhaps my imagination was playing tricks on me. I pressed the lid back down, and Stephen helped secure it. We closed the hearse doors and climbed back into the front seat, reluctant to speak, fearing that talking about it might invite something worse. This time the hearse started without any trouble, and I drove faster, determined to reach our destination. We didn't care if we broke the speed limit. All we wanted was to drop off that body and leave behind whatever sinister energy clung to it. But as I accelerated, I began to hear a faint knocking from inside. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't as forceful as the initial thud, but it was a persistent sound, like someone quietly rapping from within. Stephen and I exchanged horrified glances. Neither of us said a word, but his expression told me he heard it too. That rhythmic knock followed us for several minutes until we reached the funeral home's entrance. When we arrived, the big metal gate was locked, so I jumped out to open it, feeling an icy draft cutting across the sidewalk, as if the night itself were urging us inside. I returned to the driver's seat and drove into the garage, and the moment we parked, the tapping ceased. I turned off the engine and sat in silence for a few seconds, waiting for something else to occur. Nothing did, only the echo of the empty space. Our nerves were shot as Stephen and I opened the back doors to remove the gurney. The casket was still there, its latches appearing secure, as if the horror we had just experienced on the road was merely a haunting memory we hadn't fully grasped. The atmosphere in the garage felt heavy, with a single flickering light bulb casting shadows. Moving as carefully as we could, we slid the casket out of the vehicle and placed it on the gurney before heading toward the preparation room. The air was filled with the smells of disinfectant and wilted flowers. A knot formed in my stomach as I recalled that mysterious scent I detected on the way. Stephen excused himself to go to the bathroom, unable to handle the tension any longer, leaving me alone for a few moments. During that brief interval, I stood there staring at the casket, trying to convince myself that everything had a logical explanation. I decided to check the lid's latches one more time, and as I leaned in, I heard a soft creak, almost imperceptible. I pressed my ear closer, holding my breath, and that's when I felt it. Something was moving inside. It was a faint brushing sound, like a hand gliding along the underside of the lid. I couldn't take it anymore. I flung the casket lid open, bracing myself for the impossible. To my shock and horror, the corpse lay there, but one arm had shifted slightly to the right, as if it had moved. Its eyes were open, staring at nothing. My entire body went cold. I wanted to scream, but my throat tightened. I took a few steps back, my legs refusing to move any further. There was no way that man could be alive. His rigidity and stiffness were unmistakable. Yet the position of his arm defied all logical explanation. At that moment, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Stephen was returning. I hastily closed the casket, my heart racing. I didn't know if he noticed how pale I had become, but I mumbled something to calm myself and tried to act normal, even though I couldn't shake the feeling that something indescribable had just happened. We left the casket in the preparation room, awaiting the embalmer, and locked the door as if that could confine any sinister energy within. As we headed home, I needed to complete the incident report from that night, steering clear of any supernatural implications and only noting a minor issue with the casket lid. My boss, a seasoned man shaped by years in the funeral industry, read my report quietly. When he reached the part about the Hearse malfunction, he gave me a serious look and asked if I believed in strange occurrences. I shook my head, not wanting to delve into it. He seemed to understand that I wasn't ready to discuss it. Back in my room that early morning, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, the sound of those knocks on the hearse replayed in my mind, and I envisioned the corpse's arm moving inside the casket. I felt that at any moment, something could tap on my bedroom door or sit at the foot of my bed. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, my mind filled with disjointed images and escalating fear. By morning, I returned to the funeral home to finish my tasks. I learned that the wake would take place that same day, and the deceased's family arrived, looking distraught and confused. They were unaware of the odd events from the previous night. To them, we had simply done our job. The chapel was adorned with white flowers and a crucifix, aiming to provide some comfort for the ceremony. Yet each time I walked past the casket, I thought I heard a faint murmur, almost as if reminding me to remember what I had witnessed. The echo of that tap, tap, tap was still fresh in my memory. That evening, I decided not to stay for the entire wake. My boss gave me the rest of the day off, perhaps sensing I needed time to clear my mind. He suggested I keep myself busy to avoid dwelling on what had transpired, citing that exhaustion could play tricks on us. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There had been a presence, a shadow, or maybe the last desperate flutter of a restless spirit. I can't accurately describe it. I just know it felt entirely real and profoundly unsettling. Following that incident, the hearse functioned without any apparent issues. Someone thoroughly checked the engine and found nothing wrong. Stephen avoided bringing it up, as if keeping silent was the way to bury it. Yet I knew he remembered every detail, and whenever we were assigned another late-night pickup, he would feel that same shiver I did on those dark roads. I've attempted to rationalize it countless times. Perhaps it was an electrical glitch or simply our tired imaginations running wild. Or maybe the corpse had experienced one final spasm, a grotesque physiological reflex. Still, my intuition insists it was something beyond explanation. An energy that lingers after death, a cry from beyond the grave that manifested as knocks on a funeral hearse. In the end, I'm uncertain whether the deceased was trying to warn us about something or if he merely refused to leave without making his presence felt. What I know for sure is that I came face to face with pure horror that night. The kind of fear that grips your reasoning and makes you question reality. Sometimes when I close my eyes to sleep, I still hear that sharp knock echoing in my mind.